Hi, everybody. This is our Hatchery Live, and today we have Lisa Gill with us, and it's already a pleasure. I've been in her podcast, and she's a wonderful person. She's a member of Tough Learning Leadership Training.
Yeah,
I want to say Tufts University, but something like that.
maybe one day.
And she's acquainted with the whole thing about self-management and that kind of thing. Um, and I'll let her introduce herself, but thrilled to have her here. Really thrilled to have her here. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about yourself and then introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I guess key things to know about me are that as you said, I work with Tough Leadership Training, and we're a company. We turned 20 this year. We have our 20th birthday. And we're a group of people who have our origins in experimenting with self-managing companies going back to the 90s. And nowadays, we mostly specialize in leadership training that is really training people in the mindset and skill set shift needed to break the hierarchical dynamic in companies. So whether you have managers or you're wanting to be self-managing, there's this like hierarchical dynamic that we all are conditioned in. So how do we break that? And then I also have a podcast called Leadermorphosis, which Matt has been on, where I share stories and examples of companies around the world that are doing, radical things. And I also have a book, which is also a collection of stories about experiments with working without managers, called Mooseheads on the Table, which I can show here. So that's me really. I'm really nerdy about new ways of being together and what that means for leadership and how we can radically reimagine organizations.
When you say nerdy, sorry, I was just going to say the word nerdy sounds like thoughtful.
Yeah, maybe a self-deprecating way of saying thoughtful.
What is the name of your book?
The name of the book is Mooseheads on the Table, Stories about Self-Managing Organizations from Sweden. So and I can say some more later about what Mooseheads on the Table means. But
Okay.
We wanted
because
to have
I'm curious. I never asked you that question. So,
yeah.
So we basically asked 3 questions in the podcast. The first one is, what do you think is the problem? And I think you alluded to it, the hierarchical thing and all that, which we call fiat. And what are you doing about it? And what are your clients doing about it in this case? And I forgot the third question. What's the third question? Because it's only a half-hour program, so that usually takes up all of it. So, so what do you think is the problem? What's wrong with hierarchies? Worked for us for thousands of years, and what's wrong with that?
Yeah. So funnily enough, I think my journey with hierarchy has been to realize that hierarchy itself is neither good nor bad. Yeah. It's a technology, and it depends on how you apply it. And I think you could say that any group of human beings will have natural hierarchies of experience, hierarchies of knowledge or tenure in the company or whatever. So it's kind of a fool's game to try and get rid of hierarchy. But when I talk about like the hierarchical dynamic, what I mean is like what I see the problem as being is that organizations where there is this automatic, unconscious hierarchical dynamic, and another way to put that is like a parent-child dynamic where either managers or kind of leaders with a lowercase l are being a bit like a parent to a child, this kind of hierarchical dynamic. That is really in the way for us in the complex world that we live in now, with the complex problems that we need to solve, in terms of really tapping into the full potential and energy and creativity and intelligence of the people that we spend so much time hiring for our companies, right? So that's the problem that I see, is that we don't treat each other like adults. And part of that is also a topic that I'm passionate about, which is about how we deal with conflict and how we deal with feedback and how we deal with communication in a different way. So that's how I would identify the problem.
Is that problem in your mind, does it exist only in our conditioning, or do you think it's also a systemic issue? Because one of the reasons we call it fiat is it's also an imposed thing, right? It's a fiat dictate. And so what's your sense of that? How does that?
Yeah, I think it's both. That's also been my kind of quest, because in the beginning, like when I first started learning about, alternative ways of working, I was really convinced that hierarchy was the problem and we needed to just smash hierarchies and then everyone would be, equality would thrive and we'd all be happy in utopia. But actually what I'm learning is that even if we change the structures and processes in our organizations, we start making decisions in a different way, we have transparent self-managed salaries and so on, there's still this conditioned, inherited, again, like dynamic, the way that we relate to each other, that is much trickier because we are usually blind to that. And that is conditioned in us often in families, in schools, in workplaces.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm finding more and more is companies that I'm working with that are, maybe doing really progressive things in terms of their structures and processes are still bumping up against problems. And when you look at it, it's because they're not aware of the ways in which they're still showing up in a hierarchical way, even with those structures and processes. So that to me is a really interesting and often missing piece.
Yes. Yeah. And like you said, there are natural hierarchies. Like when you're talking, normally we're not talking to ourselves or something like that. Now that I'm talking, you guys are listening and stuff like that. So natural hierarchy is fine. It's not a problem. It's the imposed hierarchies. Do it my way. That's the way.
Exactly. Like one thing I sometimes say is that in an ideal world, you want to go from like a rigid, what you guys would call a fiat hierarchy, like a rigid, fixed, top-down, power over hierarchy, to allowing for dynamic hierarchies of choice, by which I mean, like, that we can agree together, Matt has more experience in this thing, so we think it's really good if you make decisions about that or have more influence, or we go to you for advice on that thing. Like, that would be stupid to pretend that you don't have that.
Right.
But we all agree that together. And then we agree the things, these decisions we'll make in this way by consensus or by consent or whatever. So it becomes much more about conscious hierarchies as opposed to inherited, rigid fiat hierarchies.
Right. The news this morning was that the Korean boss, or whatever his name is, he's making it clear that his daughter is going to be it. And hey, advancement of women. That's that's good, but not really, because it's just another boss they're going to inherit. And you're right. People kind of internalize this thing. They can't. The North Koreans cannot perceive a world without Kim Jong, whatever his name is, and so that's a bad thing. It's like, what are we going to do without a president? What are we going to do without a CEO? And that's what we end up calling everybody a boss. They're all bosses.
Yeah.
They're not leaders. They're bosses.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, in my experience, even the most quote unquote enlightened, CEOs or founders or whatever, most people overestimate how empowering they are or how coaching they can be, and it's, I think the first step is to kind of accept and confront the dictator that we all have within us that shows up in different ways that we're not conscious of. Because from that starting point, and this is something that my colleagues and I at Tough do a lot, it's like creating spaces for us to discover that when do I become like a dictator? When do I become like a parent? There's usually like certain situations or ways of being in someone else that triggers that. And if I can become more aware of that, then I can choose more. And then I can go from like this automatic hierarchical dynamic to something that's more adult to adult, more partnership based. But that takes practice because we haven't learned that. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how to give my colleague feedback without doing it like a boss would do it, because I've never seen how you do that in a way that's not top down. I don't know how to hold someone accountable in a way that's not like a boss. So that we have to practice and figure out.
And figure out. We don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
We kind of knew how to do it as little kids playing in the yard kind of thing. But then we were, no, that's not that. You have to impose yourself. Did it hit you? Did you hit harder? And stuff like that. So, we need to unlearn a lot of things.
Yeah,
and that's part of moving forward, is unlearning the bad things.
The first thing in the playground is who's going to be the captain, right? And then you get to choose your team. And that starts really early, right?
Yeah.
Really, really early. And now that's the captain and he makes the decisions, or she.
Yeah. And also it's a trap. Then, if we try and work, in less hierarchical ways, a trap can be, okay, no one's allowed to be the leader now. And we become so allergic to leadership. Like, no, you can't do that because there's no bosses now. That can also be its own, hell, because you can end up in death by consensus, creative entropy, this kind of false harmony, tiptoeing around culture. So there is something also about, like, it's not that bossless equals leaderless. Like, in my experience, bossless equals leaderful, but it's learning ways to unleash everyone's leadership and to let it flow like water to where it needs to go, and it will shift. And we all need to undergo a mindset shift to seeing ourselves as like employed or the boss, to seeing ourselves as co-producers, co-owners, and that means taking initiative. That means doing a whole bunch of different things that we're not used to doing. So it's, like you said, it's unlearning and learning.
And the thing about conflict, one thing that has worked for me excellently is having people around me that go, you're raising your voice, or you're just saying, I'm comfortable with this in whatever form it takes, and not reacting. Of course, I try to, but not reacting in a boss-like way of saying, how do you dare say that to me, or shut up, or oh, okay, fine, but pay attention to somebody else. There's all kinds of ways of doing it. I've been practicing competition for a long time. And but having somebody tell you, no, that's not the way to do it, it doesn't put it all on me. It's not that I have to figure it out. It's somebody else can notice it. And I have to be willing to accept that. And wrong with it. That's less difficult. So there are ways of doing it that is not all on the individual. It's the group around, the social circle around the person.
Yeah. And that's why we really like the collaborative management concept, right? We know how to manage our own lives, right? We do that fairly well. There's obviously some hierarchy and fiat structures at home as well, but for the most part, much less than our working lives. And so the idea of collaboratively managing or co-managing is really one of, well, if I can manage my life and you can manage your life, and we can help each other manage our lives respectively, then we're not necessarily asking that you be a leader. We're just asking you to do this collaboratively. And so I think there's a little tension there in the difference in the language, but for us, it seems like an important thing. How do you deal with that when you're talking about leadership, that collaborative aspect of it?
Yeah, and it's tricky because I think there are so many different definitions of leadership. And for me, when I say leadership, what I mean is is a way of being, which is taking responsibility for myself, how I show up, and also the whole. Like that's one way that I would define leadership. So if someone is sort of standing in their leadership, it means that they recognize that it's all about relationship. Like leadership is a relationship. And what you just described of co-management and collaboration, for me, what I'm realizing more and more is it's all about relationships. And I was listening to a talk the other day with Bayo Akamolafe, this amazing philosopher mind. He was saying that we don't have relationships, we are relationships.
Yes.
Yes.
So that's a big mindset shift, going from like fiat hierarchies, which are very transactional, to, you know, to something that's more co-management, is seeing that it's all about the relationships. And that's, you know, this moose heads on the table thing comes about from that. If we are going to co-manage together, then it also means we need to really upgrade how we communicate with each other, the levels of trust and openness that we have with each other.
Yes.
Because now it's not, you know, when there's a problem, if I have a problem with someone else, I don't go to HR or my boss to fix that. It's now much more up to me and my colleagues to, in relationship, figure that out. You know, so placing the moose heads on the table, moose head is like a metaphor for all the things that are taboo in a team or in an organization that we don't talk about, but they represent things that are in the way for us to collaborate effectively. So moose heads could be, you know, something that happened a long time ago that we still haven't really made peace with, a stupid decision someone made, or a reorganization, or whatever. It can be a dynamic that goes on. It can be someone's way of being. It can be like a collective mindset. So you can think of it like an iceberg. It's like everything that's under the iceberg. And that is so much what influences our level of collaboration, but we don't talk about it. We only talk about above the surface things,
Right.
Decisions, budgets, schedules, projects, deadlines. And we completely ignore it. It's as if there's this big bloody moose head. That's why the cover of the book is so kind of, it's like a horror book, because it's like this metaphor of this big bloody moose head in the middle of the table in a meeting, and no one is talking about it. We're talking over it. And as long as we do that, it's using up energy that we could be redirecting to something creative, because it takes energy to tiptoe around something. It takes energy to gossip and talk about something behind people's backs, you know, or complain to our partner when we go home. So it's sort of like a commitment to, you know, in Tough, my colleagues and I, we start every meeting by saying, any moose heads? And it's really a practice, and it never gets easy. It's always a bit uncomfortable, but we're committed to having everything that needs to be said, be said. So we start with, you know, any moose heads, and people bring them up, and it releases so much energy, because you learn things about each other, you get new perspectives, you deepen trust and relationships, you know, you free up all this energy. So it's really, that's the kind of the mindset shift that for me has been really like a wonder, is starting to practice that and be brave.
You connect in a relationship.
Yes.
All of those things are the glue of the relationship, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think we talk a lot about transparency. And I think there's two aspects of transparency. And what you've just described to me is the transparency about me.
Yeah.
Because we're so, like you just said, the transparency of the things. What are you working on? How are you working on it? Where's the data? All of that stuff. That's the easy transparency. It's still hard, because a lot of people want to keep all of that information to themselves. But it's really the, yeah, I'm feeling this way, and I think you're an idiot, and I think, and get it out there, right? What's the thing that's bugging you? Because it isn't real, but it is a door towards getting to real.
Yes.
Right? So the moose head isn't the problem. The moose head is a door to the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And the moose head, in a way, the moose head is it's not the problem, it's the reason the problem is infected, you could say.
Yes.
So it's like, you know, if Jose made a decision that we all thought was stupid, the moosehead is not the decision. The moosehead is maybe that we don't like the way you made that decision without involving us, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Or we don't like the way that we gave you input and you didn't integrate it into the decision, and we're annoyed about that. And then it's like, it's really good and really responsible and really leaderful if I can bring that up. I have a bit of a moosehead with you about this decision that you made without involving us or taking into account our input. And the story I make up, therefore, is like, it's not for real, this whole thing that we're trying to do of co-management, because you did it without us. And then we can clean that up. You can say what your intention was, and we can say, okay, we get that it wasn't your intention to do that. So what do we want to agree going forward? How can we make this work going forward? In case this moosehead pops up again, what agreements would help us to sort of have faith that that's not going to happen again, or what to do if it does happen?
One thing that we're doing in other businesses and stuff like that we're starting to start, and we were thinking of doing for this podcast as well, is we have this thing called an agreement. I call it a trust agreement. I forget.
Collaborative agreement.
Collaborative agreement. It doesn't matter. The thing is, it brings out all these things up front. So what's the mindset you bring to the party? And the thing that struck me when we did it for me, for this other thing, was what does it look like when you're collaborating with people? And I pointed out, I thought about it for a second. I thought, well, the first thing I do is reject the collaboration out of hand. It's like, cross my arms, screw you, let's do stupid ideas, because new ideas are great. They're wonderful if they're mine. If they're yours, I reject them. And the other confusing thing is that I go from that to I embrace it. If it's something of worth to me, I embrace it, and I start asking questions about it. So that conversation alone, I mean, for me, it was great. It revealed a lot of things about how I do things and why it confuses people, because it should. But the other thing about it is that it also opens doors to the relationship that has both of us in the relationship. And people could say, "Oh, wait a minute, you're looking, you have your arms crossed still, right? Or you're starting to embrace it, or are you criticizing what I'm saying, or it's a different way of communicating and relating to people, and that's going to be very important going forward, beyond co-management, which we call co-ownership, because it's very key. If people feel attacked, they react with defense and attack. Transparency, we call that vulnerability, which is the ability to do self-harm, to do harm to yourself. So how do we turn the whole mess of complicated things around is very important. And those kinds of communication skills are key. So we need to come up with names like mooseheads and things that haven't had a name and have become invisible.
Yeah, that normalize it too.
Yes.
And I love what you're saying, because for me, that's such a good example of the mindset shift, which is most of us in organizations try to avoid conflict or resolve it. Yes. And in both cases, it's like conflict is something bad, and if it happens, something went wrong. Instead of seeing it as we're all completely unique, different human beings with unique experiences and feelings and mindsets. So of course we're going to have conflicts, and it's good that we have conflicts, because otherwise we're all, like clones of each other, and that wouldn't be good.
Right.
So I love your example of like proactive, like anticipating, we're going to have conflicts because sometimes this is what it looks like when I collaborate. So most people leave the conflict piece to, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And then when you come to it, you don't have the capacity, you don't know what to do with it. You're like, whoa, now what, So I love this idea of like, let's really put effort and time into our relationships and how we show up in relationships, and have it as a conversation that we keep having all the time. It's like working on the relationship and not
Yes.
just working in a relationship.
It's a framework for the relationship,
Yeah, exactly.
right? It's building that framework early on so
Yes.
that you know where you're at when you're in it in the moment.
Yes.
Because it's pretty easy to say to Matt, hey, by the way, you're being this way, right?
Yeah.
Because we have a framework by which we can have that conversation without creating a new thing. It's like, how do you name that? What is it? What should I call it? What we've already named it. It's already part of our terminology, and I can point it, and he can do the same to me. It helps us so much.
Yep, definitely.
But I like the idea of putting names on those, the crossing of the arms and the embracement and stuff like that. So moose head and chicken head, and we can come up with other names. And
We
I'll
have
tell you,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say the thing of naming things and making them visible is super important.
Yes.
It's worked for my wife and I forever. And it's really important to say, oh, that's one of these, or that's one of those, and name it.
Yeah. It's like you can't transform what's invisible or what's not said.
Exactly.
So it's like, yeah. And we in Tough, we have names for our different mindsets or our different pitfalls. I have my colleague Carl Eric is like Carl Eric the critic, because he has a tendency to become critical sometimes. Or, I have a mindset that I'm not interesting. So then I become kind of quiet and shy, and people wonder what I'm thinking, and they think I'm being cold. I have a colleague who thinks I'm not smart. So she'll say, my mindset, I'm not smart, is popping up now. So I'm just feeling a bit insecure. And we just talk about it like they're friends, and it really takes the scariness out of it to name things.
If you don't mind, Lisa, I know it's almost time to wrap up, and I wondered if you could tell us a little bit, that third question, because I think it would be really interesting. We've talked a lot about the problem, the solution. Do you think it's enough? Is what we're doing in this space, whether we're talking about leadership or co-management, that what we are doing collectively or individually in your group is enough, or what do you think is still missing?
I mean, I think it depends on which day you ask me. Sometimes I feel optimistic, and I feel like, it's enough that I'm, affecting, transforming, catalyzing change in this small piece of the world that I'm working with. And other times it feels, it's still so niche, it's still such a small percentage of organizations working in this way. Even though, I've had 80 plus episodes of my podcast, it's still a small number, right? And also I think we need to reinvent education. I'm really passionate about that, reinventing how we, how people learn in schools, and doing that in a co-managed way. Mm-hmm. And also, neighborhoods and societies, like this cost of living crisis at the moment. And what would it be like if we had citizens, people of their place, actually shaping and helping to solve problems like climate crisis on like a local micro level, like that. I think it has to be a network of many, many, many things. And this is a small piece of that. But I think it all connects to this larger paradigm shift, which is, moving away from this fiat mindset and way of being and way of relating to something else.
And seeing it and being able to talk about it. And
yes,
that's when you start taking it apart and putting other things in place. And like I think we said in the book, and I say it often, is I have no idea how this is going to develop. But we got to start. We got to start somewhere, or else we're going to go over the cliff at some point.
Yes.
Maybe not now. We'll solve our problems. We'll come up with a new form of capitalism or whatever. But we're going to go over the hill at some point. There's only so much Earth to have, and the dreams of going to Mars and all that stuff. I don't want to live on Mars. I want to live in this area.
Good old Earth.
I don't
Yeah,
like flying, so I don't want to get in a spaceship.
Good old Earth. And, so we have a couple of minutes. So Summerhill, you familiar with Summerhill?
Yes.
In
Yeah.
your neck of the woods, and Sudbury in our neck of the woods are schools that are more like what we're thinking of. And there's a lot of movement in South America.
Yeah, like self-organized learning environments. Seoul. I spoke to Seoul, Colombia, for example. So there's some really great, because they tend to be private schools is the problem.
They tend to be private schools, yes.
But there are structures and frameworks that don't depend on, paying expensive fees and stuff. So
yeah, and there are other ways of supporting the organization.
for sure.
It's just that we never explored. We left as to be fiat, dominated by fiat money, and but that's more likely to change. So yeah, there's some in Mexico, some and then South America. I don't know Central America of any, but I suspect Costa Rica is probably a good place to have stuff like that. So, well, thank you very much for your time. It's always a pleasure talking to you. And you're not quiet. You are very smart. You are very smart. And what was the other thing that whatever the critic? It's easy to criticize. As somebody said, criticism is cheap and fast. So thank you for being part of this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lisa.
Yeah, so happy to be invited.
Well, I would like to invite you back again, because sometimes I get this funny feeling where my hair stands up on end and I go, I want to do this again.
You should say my hair.
Well, no, the problem is I have more hair on my arms than I do on my head. So that's what stands up.
But you got most of your face.
I just got that feeling. And so I'd love to have you back and maybe talk a little bit more about another topic, because I think we dug a little deep, which was good, into some of this stuff, and it'd be nice to do it again. So,
So I forgot to mention that next week we'll be talking to Neil Masombo. I pronounce it in Spanish, so I don't know if this is right or wrong, but Neil Masombo, he's an agile transformation coach with C Prime, and looking forward to that one as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.